Hello guys. So sorry for taking a while before for posting another video. So here's an Erwin X reader as requested. I hope you enjoy. And warning though, this one is super soppy, like soppy romance, and it's amazing. If you're into that or if you're not into that, I hope you're informed now. Enjoy. He watched her. His calm blue eyes simply followed her every movement. The horse she sat on galloped towards the entrance of their stable, where she slowed down as her eyes met the commander's. He lowered his gaze shyly, but not making it obvious that he was staring. His eyes trailed up again, noticing how beautiful she looked under the moonlight. Her lips curled up into a ball, gentle smile, and she blinked longingly at him as her smile grew bigger. The commander couldn't help but smile softly. He slowly walked towards her and held out his hand. He had been suffering from his cravings recently. The need to just touch her was on his mind. She gently slipped her hand onto his as he lifted her leg over, facing the commander. She slid off slowly. Her hands held onto his shoulders as his strong hands held her waist and lifted her off the horse, spinning her around swiftly and gently placing her back onto the ground. Their touch did not depart. He held her beautiful body close, his fingers gently feeling the softness of her hair, the softness of her curves, the warmth of her, that divine scent she always gave off. He felt peaceful, at ease, whenever he was around her. Her hands still had not left his shoulders. They only gazed at each other for another second, and suddenly stepped away from each other. The feelings were clearly mutual. However, the commander was too nervous to confess, and so was she. He only cleared his throat, knowing he had to say something to break the awkward pause. "I'm glad we made it back together without any casualties." She spoke gently. Her pretty feminine voice broke the silence. Turning slightly to look up at the moon, then back at the commander to smile softly. He would only stare. Seeing that gorgeous smile of hers made him want to kiss her so badly. "You're a good leader. We all trust you, Commander. We all have faith in you." This made his heart beat a little faster. Being appreciated by her is all he needed to be motivated in order to do great things for humanity, for the safety of her future. They only stood a foot away from each other. The tension was obviously there. However, it was ignored. The commander had always thought love was a waste, but with the girl standing right beside him, he knew he couldn't let her get away. He believed it was time he was truthful towards her. This may be the last time he would ever see her. No one knows when death comes. "Thank you, listener," is all he said, resting his hand on her shoulder. She only smiled by the touch. He calmly looked at her, observing that beautiful glow. She looked up and locked her eyes with his. Roses began blooming on her cheeks as she lost eye contact with the blonde. "Listener," he begins. "Yes, Commander?" She finally had the courage to look up at him again. The tall man, standing beside her, looked directly into her eyes. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." They began walking to the edge of the stable. He rests his hand on the wooden fence surrounding them. However, not losing eye contact with her. He was just going to confess now. Whatever the consequences may be, he didn't care. I I have strong feelings towards you. He paused, realizing what he had just spewed out from his mouth. However, she looked longingly at him, indicating for him to continue. Love is something I've always been careless about. I've never really put thought to it. Never really been interested because I believed it was a waste, knowing that I cannot guarantee my own life. However, when I met you, that changed. I knew that you belonged to me. It's been a long time now, listener, and I just need to tell you this no matter how crazy I may sound. He looked away briefly, not knowing what her response would be. Go on, she encouraged, with a small smile on her face. A faint blush had appeared on the commander's cheek. She noticed this and couldn't help but giggle quietly. He shook his head and looked away, smiling endlessly. He gazed back up at her, and that handsome smile soon faded away. He breathed out heavily and just let everything he wanted to say out. Listener, you're meant to be mine. That one sentence alone threw her off instantly. I can't let you go. I don't think I can take watching another man take you from me. You're meant to be mine. He repeated this. She thought he was joking at first, but he spoke of this with passion and great belief. The intense feeling of lust and love washed over them immediately. All she could do was a response at that moment was to show affection. Her hands slid up to cup his jaw. She closed the gap between them and gently combed all of his hair back with her fingers. He was overwhelmed with this feeling and taken aback. His hands roamed her curves and soon closed the gap between the both of them as his lips finally pressed against hers. There was a long silence. The kiss was passionate, yet so gentle. After so long, their love for each other had finally been fed. However, the hunger was only gone temporarily. She parted with him, gazing into his eyes with the most adoring look. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He looked away with defeat. I guess I wasn't too sure if you felt the same. Erwin looked back at her with a guilty look. Of course I feel the same way, Erwin. This was the first time she hadn't used his title, and he smiled, realizing she didn't call him Commander. I really want to be with you, and I don't care if we have to keep this a secret as long as we're together. I'll be happy. She almost teared up. She had been doubting that this day would ever come. The commander smiled, planting a kiss on her head, and then another just beside her mouth, wrapping his arms around her. As he rests his forehead against hers, then will you be mine? She looked up as if she was surprised to ever hear those words come out of his mouth. Observing his handsome features and his pretty blue eyes, the way he looked at her, spoke to her, held her. It made her feel precious and safe. She smiled, nodding as she lightly laughed, and wrapped her arms around his neck lovingly. She was lifted off the ground, slightly as his arms held her tightly. Yes, of course. As soon as they walked back into the building hand in hand, the commander had taken off his green cloak uniform and had given it to his lover to keep her warm. As they walked back to their rooms, she turned to the commander, about to return his cloak to him. He lifted up the hood over her head as it almost fully covered her face. He let out a deep, gentle laugh, trying to be quiet as the others had already gotten to bed. She had been waiting to hear that beautiful laugh from him. She blushed, looking up with the same adorable smile. He bent down to kiss her once again. It became a little heated this time. Her hands played with his hair and his hands pulled back the hood. His fingers were tangled in her hair. His lips trailed down her neck, just as she began to make those pretty sounds. He pulled away, knowing he couldn't go any further. It was late, and they weren't in an appropriate place. It wasn't the right time. However, she understood, taking off the cloak and handing it back to Erwin. "Good night, Commander," she spoke in a teasing manner, giving him a small smile and letting go of his hands as she turned away. Suddenly, she felt his hand grab her wrist. She turned back in a little surprise as his hand slid back down into her hand. At this very moment he didn't have a care in the world about where they were and how late it was. He wanted to stay close to her so desperately. "Stay with me?" He opened the door to his room. She didn't complain. Pulling her in, she smiled and wrapped her arms around him as she slowly shut the door behind her with her foot. They shared small, meaningful kisses, hugs, and giggles. He lit up some candlelights, placing them on the desk. The only source of warmth and delight were given off by the candles and the moonlight. It set a romantic mood. He began taking off his uniform and changing into more comfortable clothing, however, leaving the nightshirt behind. It wasn't needed. So did Listener, skipping into an elegant night dress. He looked at her in awe, watching the way she let her hair loose, and watching her walk over to the bed in barefoot. She only laid down on the covers when Erwin approached her, kissing her lovingly, and laying her onto the bed. This is what they both wanted, the precious time being spent together. This is what love felt like, what love tasted like. It was a drug, and they were both already addicted. Erwin climbed on top of Listener, letting her feel every muscle of his body. That was all too attractive for her, not forgetting his strength either. He was strong mentally, emotionally, physically. His calm and determined personality, his good heart with good intentions, the way, even though he had gone through so much, he still smiled through it every now and then. That everything about him was just attractive. And it wasn't just her outstanding beauty that Erwin had fallen in love with, but also her skill, her sweet voice, her positive aura that made him feel comfortable and at ease around her. She was everything that he deemed perfect. He planted several kisses along her collarbone, making sure to leave a love bite. He loved the inappropriate sounds she'd make under him, how she'd moan his title as quietly as possible. He loved how her hands would play with his hair, and lightly scrape his back, staring into her pretty eyes as he stroked her hair, pushing away all the strands. He kissed her flush-filled cheeks, gently slowly going down onto her soft lips. He finally pressed his lips against hers. Their lips moved in unison. Their tongues danced together slightly. They parted slowly, and Erwin laid next to Listener, just admiring her. She rolled over till she was on top of him. They looked onto each other's eyes, which felt like hours. She kissed him with much more hunger. His hands roamed her back and rear as the kiss became more and more heated. They parted, and suddenly she was yawning, the feeling of sleep starting to kick in. Erwin let out a small laugh as Listener blushed by the sudden yawn. "Excuse me," she spoke out silently. His deep voice made his chest rumble, and she found that extremely satisfying. He propped his arm up, getting up slightly, and watched how she was quickly drifting off to sleep. "You're so beautiful," he whispered into her ear, and he received a small smile as she closed her eyes. She curled up against him, feeling safe and secure. He smiled he smiled warmly, stroking her hair and leaving kisses on her forehead, cheek, and neck. He wrapped his arms around her and finally laid his head onto the pillows. He was drifting off to sleep now. He was happy, knowing that she was with him, by his side, and that he was with her, by her side. End. Hey guys, so I'm back after a month or so. 2 months? 3 months? Ugh, I'm sorry. Like, quarantine's been really harsh on me, and college was, well, it did end. My first year did end, and then suddenly we have mid-year, so I have college again. So sorry about that. I just have a lot of obligations to attend to right now. But despite of that, I hope you were able to enjoy this video. I'll be working. I am still working on that BNHA fanfic I promised in the last video. I just need time to really write it. I'm having trouble finding the time to do so. So let's just hope that I do find the time to do so. Anyway, bye bye. See you next time. Like and subscribe.